Hey, Hannah. Good. Sure. Should I send it to you or have I sent to you? Okay. We're just getting on now. A couple of them. See if I can. Elizabeth, are you on? Hey, Beth.
Yes, I am.
Okay. I'm on with Hannah from Congressman Nadler's office.
Mm-hmm.
And wanted us to resend the link if we, to Hannah.
Absolutely. I will email it to her right now.
Okay. All right, Hannah, it's on its way. No extra charge.
And Elizabeth, I don't have the rights to share my screen.
Hello.
All right, try now.
My printer isn't working. The formatting is all off. So what you might just want to do is if you can take a few minutes just to review the questions that might come up from the panel later.
Yeah, okay.
Just because by the time I get it to you, it might be too late anyway, because you're already beyond.
I don't have those questions.
I brought my laptop into the office, but I left the wireless mouse at home. So, but luckily I can play games with the screen by just touching it and moving it around on the pad here. Can you hear me okay? I took my headset off.
Yep.
Okay.
Can hear you good.
Hear you.
I always forget it's so hot in this office. I'm overdressed because my apartment's always cold.
I am always dying in the office. I have to remember to wear short sleeves.
Well, honestly, I just ran to the bathroom. I took off my long johns. I said, this is way too hot. And put on a cleaner shirt. So see Polly's connecting to the audio. What else we have? Deasia Samuels from our youth program. You could do some introductions while we're waiting there, Beth. We're not live, right?
We are live. There's only about 10 people on so far.
Okay.
But yes, there's no backstage on Zoom.
Okay. Well, just so I can introduce you, Laura is from our top program. She's going to ask
Hi.
a question from our behavioral health cause area. And Deasia is from the Beacon Youth Program. Oh, good. Here's Caroline. And Carolyn's from our senior center. And Polly's from a local public housing group called the Federal 8.
Turn around.
Well, we'll give people a chance to gather. And last I checked, we were, you know how many people are registered, Beth, offhand?
Yeah, it was about 130.
Good. So don't get nervous, folks.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Loud and clear. Sound good.
Yep.
Okay. Now give me the question from your phone.
During the meeting, we might mute all the panelists just to eliminate background noise, but I'll give you the heads up when we're going to be calling on the next one, so you'll know you'll be next.
Yes, that's fine.
Yeah, I mentioned we will start off with the seniors.
All right.
Can we enlarge that, Hannah?
So Rosalind and Carolyn will start.
First, yeah, okay.
But that'll be Congressman Nadler's first going to give us an update and overview of a number of the things that have been happening in Washington and his work with the Judiciary Committee, which has been a little busy this past year.
Okay, I'm sure.
Hi, Congressman Nadler. I see
Hi.
chin. Just have to lift up the camera angle a little bit. We could see you better.
Yeah, I can't see how.
Oh, there
I can't see myself, so I don't know.
Yeah, we're seeing your chin and your tie. So if you push the, yeah, that's better.
All right, let's.
Thank you.
I got to put something under it. Okay now?
Yes. And I can't wait till we have you back here at the Senior Center and meeting with us in person again.
Yeah, I agree.
So we're going to get started shortly. It's officially a 5:30 start time. And so we just have a few minutes. So Congressman Nadler, while we're waiting, I could give you a sense of how this is going to flow.
Okay.
We want to just, a brief report, I guess 20, 25 minutes, whatever you're comfortable with. Just an overview of the work of the Judiciary Committee, your thoughts on impeachment, and then maybe a little bit about the COVID, the stimulus plan that's apparently about to get through the House and be sent over to the Senate in a few days. And then we're going to have, we have a panel of folks representing Goddard's various program areas. So we're going to be going from seniors to youth to mental health to housing. We have a couple of questions, and then from some of our NYCHA residents, Cynthia and Polly, I think you know. And then we'll have additional questions being sent to us through a chat box. And as time allows, we'll try to pose additional questions that are coming in from the audience.
Fine.
Okay. So this is, for folks joining us early, this is some behind the scenes preparation, but we'll get underway just right after 5:30.
Thank you, Larry.
It sounded like Robert. Hi, Robert.
Hey, Larry. Thank you. Hello, Congressman.
Hi, that's Robert who?
Robert Conkling, West 14th Street, Manhattan.
Greetings.
Greetings, sir.
He's one of our tenant leaders at the SRO Law Project.
Mm-hmm.
And the battle with his building, it could be a novel.
Yes, but you've helped tremendously. Goddard has saved us time and time again.
That's what they do.
Yes, sir.
So Congressman Nadler, Rod is on with us too, Dr. Rod Jones. Rod,
how are you, Congressman?
Okay, how are you?
Good, thank you. Thank you so much for joining again this year.
You're quite welcome.
So once we hit the 5:30 mark, I'll introduce Rod as the direct expert for Goddard, and then he'll introduce Congressman Nadler.
You have a panelist. You have a panel, no?
Yeah. So it's going to be about 8 of us in this panel. You'll see it as a gallery. Once we go live, you'll see the gallery.
There's feedback.
Yeah. Hey, Larry, we're getting some feedback.
Okay. It might be if we can mute everybody's mic, and then as I call on folks, we can unmute the various folks one at a time. That usually happens if somebody's on 2 different devices and it creates a feedback. So we have about 2 minutes to go time. And again, we'll unmute folks as it's time for you to speak. So the first person will be, again, I'll introduce Rod, and then he will introduce Congressman Nadler. And everybody else will be muted. And then I'll go through first with seniors, youth, behavioral health, housing, and then questions from the public. Guess we should have thought about some music while we were waiting.
I tried to share it and then I was having a hard time with other people's speakers, so I gave up.
Okay, so looks like we're at 5:30. So we do have about 150 folks registered. So I know people will be joining as the meeting ensues. So occasionally I may give some directions, explain what's happening just to keep folks oriented. Okay, so we're in gallery view now, so folks should be able to see one another. And if you want to turn your video on, we'll be able to see you. So let me start. My name is Larry Wood. I serve as the Director of Organizing here at Goddard Riverside. And we've been hosting these annual forums, first with Assembly Member Nadler, then Congressman Nadler, for decades, I guess at least 20 years or more. Last year was the first year we couldn't host the event because he was a little tied up with the work of the Judiciary Committee and an impeachment hearing last January. But we're really pleased to have Congressman Nadler join us today. And he will give an overview of some of the issues facing Congress and the Judiciary Committee and his work, recent work and work he sees coming down the road. And then we will have questions posed from the panel you see. And then we will be taking questions through the chat box that are coming in from the audience. So if you do have questions you'd like to pose to Congressman Nadler, please go to that question box or the chat box to post your questions. And our communications team will be going through them. You can also like a question if you see something posted. So if we see a lot of likes on a particular question, we'll try to make that a priority. And then I'll be looking down at my tablet occasionally because they will be emailing me the questions that they'll be looking at. So let me first introduce Dr. Rod Jones, known around here as Rod. He's our executive director and also like to call him our head worker. So let's unmute Rod and he can introduce Congressman Nadler.
Thank you so much, Larry. Welcome everybody. Tonight I have the honor and privilege to introduce Congressman Nadler. Congressman Nadler, Jerry Nadler as we've come to know, is a representative of the 10th Congressional District, which is one of the most diverse districts in the country. For over 30 years, he served in both the House and the New York State Assembly. And we know he's always been a strong voice and a very principled voice and a progressive voice on behalf of the people. Tonight, Congressman Nadler will speak about some of his work on the Judiciary Committee, as well as his thoughts around President Biden's $1.9 trillion relief package. In addition, he'll be taking other questions from the general public about related matters. So welcome Congressman Nadler tonight and welcome you all. Thank you. Larry?
Thank you. So I guess everybody else would be muted, but we can unmute Congressman Nadler. Congressman Nadler, you might have to just hit the unmute. Well, we had Congressman Nadler a minute ago, so he will be coming on shortly. In the interim, let me just describe the panels. Goddard Riverside is a settlement house, a large community center, and we have a huge variety of programs serving young people, seniors, the homeless in the community, a whole host. And we see our programs not just as programs and services, but as cause areas. So we will be going through and having questions posed from each of our cause areas. There's so many issues that impinge upon the lives of the people we serve. We believe it's incumbent on us as a settlement house and as a community center to work with the people we serve to address the bigger issues out there affecting their lives and affecting our community. So that's why we call them cause areas. So we will start again with enriching the lives of older adults. We have a number of senior programs, a senior center here at 88th, another senior center down at Lincoln Square, and then 2 naturally occurring retirement communities, NORCs, which are housing in this neighborhood, which have become de facto senior housing. So I'll describe the other program cause areas as we ask the questions, but we're just waiting for the technical difficulties to work themselves out, and we'll get Congressman Nadler on shortly. Can't do my tap dancing routine, so I'll describe the next cause area is preparing children for youth and success. So we have after school programs, we have a Beacon program. We also have early education programs, Head Start and daycare. So working with young people when they're 3, 4 years old, and a continuum of programs, including one of our programs is called the Options Program, which assists young men and women and older folks too, if they're interested in going to college. And part of the Options Program is an advocacy coalition that got formed called Degrees, and they worked on issues around college access and equity. So you'll be hearing from one of the fellows who were part of Degrees Coalition, as well as one of the staff members in our youth program will be asking a question. And then another cause area for us is promoting behavioral health and wellness. So there's a variety of programs that work with people who are mental health consumers, as it were, and have men and women who might have been formerly homeless or reside in different housing or live in the community. We have a number of clubs and programs serving folks, as well as an ACT team, which does intensive work with folks who need a lot of concerted care and effort. So there'll be a question around behavioral health you hear. And then housing and homeless issues has been a major cause area for Goddard Riverside for decades. Everything from homelessness prevention and the work of the SRO Law Project, and now known as the Law Project, fighting for a right to counsel, making sure tenants who have issues are represented in housing court. We've been conducting homeless outreach since the late 1970s. And we run supported housing for folks who have experienced homelessness and now rehoused. And we have a number of supported housing residences, as well as Phelps House, which is senior and disabled housing at 88th and Columbus. And then we do a lot of work with our local neighbors in public housing. And they have a kind of a coalition of sorts called the Federal 8. And you'll be hearing from 2 of their representatives on some issues affecting NYCHA and HUD-related issues. So it looks like we have Congressman Nadler with us.
Hi.
Good. Okay, so you heard about our cause areas. So let me turn it over to Congressman Nadler.
I didn't hear anything. I just got on.
No, this is for the audience. I just gave him some background. So
okay.
A few minutes when it's time for questions. So thank you for joining us, Congressman Nadler. So the floor is yours to give us kind of an overview of your work of late.
Thank you. It's good to be with you all. I first want to thank Goddard Riverside for organizing this event and for the great work you are doing to support the Upper West Side community, not just the Upper West Side, the West Side community amid these unprecedented times. I hope everyone is healthy and taking precautions to keep themselves that way by continuing to mask up and adhering to public health measures. Before I begin discussing what we're doing in Congress to address the dire public health and economic impacts of COVID, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the Senate's vote to acquit former President Trump this past Saturday. Like many of you, I'm disappointed that even after the House managers brought a brilliant, stirring case proving that President Trump held direct responsibility for having incited an insurrection against the US Capitol on January 6th, 43 senators egregiously chose their self-interest over our democracy. I do take heart in that a bipartisan majority of the Senate voted with conscience and their duty to uphold the Constitution by convicting Trump. As the chair of the Judiciary Committee, I'm proud of our long record of seeking accountability for this president or former president. We have performed our oversight duty to expose his lies and oppose his horrendous policies. The Judiciary Committee, which I chair, is at the forefront of some of the most pressing and complex issues facing the country. I look forward to working with my colleagues to pass crucial legislation, much of which passed the House in the last Congress, such as H.R. 1, the For the People Act, which is a transformational democracy reform package, and the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act, which will restore and strengthen voting rights. We will also take up legislation that will reform our immigration system, reduce drug prices, pursue criminal justice and policing reform, and safeguard the civil rights and civil liberties of all Americans, including LGBTQ Americans, to name a few. The major priority of the Congress is to get Americans the help they need during the pandemic. Democrats in Congress are working with the Biden administration to negotiate a $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan, which is an ambitious and wide-ranging relief plan. I wanted to highlight some crucial areas in the bill that will be top of mind for many of you. The past year has laid bare that the only way we can get back to a semblance of normalcy is to mitigate the ongoing COVID public health crisis. The American Rescue Plan will create a national strategy for testing and vaccination and ensure the hardest hit communities get the resources they need. The plan calls for $20 billion to produce vaccines and therapeutics and improve vaccine distribution. It's no secret that New York has had a rocky rollout of vaccines, and I know you have many questions about when you'll be able to get vaccinated. The Biden administration launched a new federal program that is partnering with certain retail pharmacies nationwide to receive limited COVID vaccine supplies directly from the federal government. There are a few pharmacies on the Upper West Side already part of this program. I will continue to push to increase the supply of vaccines, speed up the distribution to the states, and work with state and local officials to ensure that all New Yorkers have access to vaccines where they live. As part of this effort, we need to address the racial health disparities that COVID has revealed during the pandemic. I'm proud to co-sponsor Representative Nydia Velasquez's bill to provide federal grants to communities of color impacted by COVID to engage in local outreach about vaccinations so we can improve vaccine confidence and ensure vaccine access in communities of color in New York City. The American Rescue Plan will also subsidize 85% of COBRA health coverage for workers who lost their employer-sponsored health insurance and choose to keep their plans. It will also increase premium assistance for Affordable Care Act health insurance plans. I will note here that President Biden reopened the Affordable Care Act for 3 months for people to buy new coverage or change their current plan. In New York State, we have until March 31st to enroll or change coverage. However, I believe this crisis has exposed the tragedy of employer-provided insurance, even when guaranteed by government. We must continue to work towards Medicare for all to guarantee that all Americans have comprehensive health insurance. The American Rescue Plan will provide direct economic relief to Americans as we see too many people across the country falling into poverty, facing eviction, and struggling to put food on the table. The bill will send full $1,400 survival checks to individuals earning up to $75,000 and married couples earning up to $150,000, the same limits that were included in the CARES Act of a few months ago. I am fighting to ensure the bill does not lower the income thresholds or otherwise target the relief which might unnecessarily hurt those who desperately need it, something which the Republicans are trying to do. I have also called for Congress to further expand these checks by making them into recurring payments to provide additional relief to struggling families. With additional unemployment insurance set to expire in March, the bill calls for extending unemployment insurance, pandemic unemployed assistance, and the federal supplemental benefits through August, and increasing the federal supplemental benefits to $400 a week. Democrats fought to include raising the federal minimum wage to $15 in the bill, which would raise the pay of over 27 million low-wage workers. I will work to ensure that this stays in the bill and is signed into law because one job should be enough to live on. Safe and affordable housing should be a right for all Americans, especially during a global pandemic. The American Rescue Plan would provide $25 billion in additional emergency rental assistance and $5 billion in utility assistance and LIHEAP for low and moderate income renters. It would also extend all eviction and foreclosure moratoriums through September 31st. We must ensure that public housing agencies have the funding they need to improve the health and safety of residents during the pandemic and going forward, and to keep residents in their homes, even as incomes fluctuate during the economic crisis. In New York, we feel this need acutely, which is why I am proud to be a co-sponsor of the Public Housing Emergency Response Act, which would allocate $70 billion in funding for public housing capital repairs and upgrades throughout the country, with $32 billion of the allotted aid would flow directly to NYCHA. After suffering through this crisis for nearly a year, millions of small businesses will not survive the next few months without big and bold relief measures from Congress. The America Rescue Plan will provide additional funds to programs made available to small businesses in December's relief bill. PPP was reopened through at least March 31st, with over $284 billion in funding available for small businesses most impacted by the pandemic, and expanded eligibility to allow for small nonprofits like housing co-ops to receive funds. Independent restaurants, bars, and other food and drinking establishments are important to the fabric of our community and have continued serving us throughout the pandemic. I'm proud to have co-sponsored and worked hard to secure a place for the Restaurants Act in this bill, which would give restaurants and bars a better chance at fully reopening and employing their teams again. The last areas of the bill I want to highlight is the American Rescue Plan provision for state local government funding and transit. New York was hit first and hardest in the pandemic. During the early days, when so little was known about how the disease spread or how to treat it, New York was on the front lines. As a result, our economy took a massive hit, endangering cuts to benefits and programs on which our most vulnerable populations depend. The bill provides $350 billion in state and local funding. I led the New York congressional delegation in calling for the full $15 billion in state funding to prevent cuts to education and critical programs like Medicaid. The bill also provides $30 billion for public transit agencies like the MTA for operating costs like payroll and PPE, which will ensure that it can provide the services on which New Yorkers rely heavily. I'm also fighting to protect the quality of life for residents of the West Side. Many of you have contacted our office over the years about the noisy disturbances caused by helicopters, and I've co-sponsored 2 bills addressing this issue. The Safe and Quiet Skies Act, which would direct the FAA to adopt National Transportation Safety Board recommendations that will increase safety and reduce the community disruption of commercial air tours, and the Improving Helicopter Safety Act, which would prohibit non-essential helicopters from flying within New York City airspace, excuse me, and drastically reduce helicopter traffic. I know this past year has been trying and difficult for all of us, but with the American Rescue Plan and the national rollout of a coordinated vaccination effort, we are beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel. I will keep fighting to get relief to our district and to Americans across the country. Before we open it up to questions, I want to encourage you to contact my office if we can be of assistance with any of the bill's provisions or other federal concerns. You can submit any problems or casework through my website at nadler.house.gov, or you can call 212-367-7350. And let me repeat, the website is nadler.house.gov, and the phone number is 212-367-7350. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Nadler. So the panelists, we will be calling on folks one at a time. So they represent the various program or cause areas here at Goddard Riverside, because we see our services, not just services we provide to the community, but causes that we do a lot of work around. So the first set of questions are going to come from 2 seniors in our senior center here at 88th Street, Rosalind Ricketts and Carolyn Trim, who are sisters, and have some questions about Social Security. So let me pass it to, I think Rosalind will start with the question about Social Security. So we can unmute Rosalind.
Yes. Good evening, panel. and Congressman Nadler.
Good evening.
Evening. Many people had been led to believe that, especially young folks, that the Social Security is going bankrupt when Social Security Trust Fund is depleted. I have also heard that potential problems with the trust fund is eliminated by raising the cap in the payroll deductions. Can you explain what that means?
Well, in December of last year, the chief actuary for Social Security updated his estimate of Social Security's solvency after the pandemic. He estimated the trust fund will remain solvent through 2034, a one-year reduction in solvency from estimates before the pandemic. Even before the pandemic, I have called for major reforms to bolster, improve, and modernize Social Security to ensure it remains solvent long into the future. We've all seen how imperative it is now to save Social Security. And to that end, I've been a co-sponsor of the Social Security 2100 Act over the past several Congresses, and I will be once again as soon as it's reintroduced. The bill expands benefits by providing a modest 2% boost in benefits for all beneficiaries, improves COLA updates by relying on CPI-E, Consumer Price Index, targeted to seniors to reflect how they actually spend money, sets minimum benefits at 25% above the poverty line, cuts tax raises for middle and low-income seniors by raising thresholds for taxing non-Social Security income, makes Social Security solvent through 2100, and combines the Social Security Old Age and Survivor and Disability funds into one trust fund so that all benefits are paid at least through 2100.
Thank you.
So as part of that legislation, the raising the cap on the payroll tax deduction, is that part of that legislation? The cap is 165,000 approximately?
Yes.
Could you explain that? I don't think everybody knows what we mean when we say raise the cap.
Well, it means that you can get Social Security even if your sources of income exceed the cap or the former cap.
Yeah, but I also believe that people don't pay taxes above 165,000. You're paying 3% or so.
That's right, they don't. And
so
that's
if you're earning $330,000, you're effectively contributing 1.5% into Social Security rather than 3%. So lifting the cap would bring in more money and keep the trust fund solvent as well.
Well, that's part of it, yes.
Great, thank you. Now, Carolyn had a question related to the COLA, and not just the cost, the COLA. I know you described a different type of COLA adjustment for seniors. Can you describe that a little more, and what other things can be done? I mean, well, Carolyn's going to ask that. Carolyn, sorry.
Okay, my question is about the COLA. My mom is 97, and I'm giving you a practical example. There was a COLA increase, I think, don't quote me on the amount, it's either $2 or $3. So every time she gets a COLA increase, she only got $7.55 a month. Every time she gets a COLA, her rent goes up by $3. Technically, she never got an increase. So her rent goes up by $3. Her food stamps go down by $3. So instead of receiving an increase, she's now in the minus $3. That to me makes sense, and no one could explain it to me. If you're going to give me a cost of living increase, I should be able to see it. I understand the rent has to go up every year. I have healthcare goes up, that's not the problem. However, because if I'm paying Medicare goes up. I get a cost of living, cost goes up. My rent goes up. I'm not receiving social SNAP benefits. So everything goes up. I'm not seeing an increase. I'm now in a negative situation. What can be done to affect that for someone who is in such a thing?
Well, as you recall, I said that in the pending legislation, we improved the COLA updates by relying on CPI-E. That is to say, right now, COLA increases are based on the cost of living. But we know that senior citizens have a higher cost of living than the average person. So the legislation I'm supporting, that I mentioned before, changes it, as I mentioned, to the CPIE, that is to say, to a consumer price index targeted to seniors to reflect how they actually spend money. And this should alleviate exactly the problem that you're talking about, which is what it's aimed to solve.
Okay, so that will be coming up in the future in Congress.
Well, that's in the legislation that's pending now. Yes.
Do you need us to support this situation in any way, or this bill in any form? How?
Well, you can write Congress, not me, obviously.
No, not you.
To support the American Relief Plan. It's part of President Biden's proposal.
It's called the American Relief Plan?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I have a quick follow-up question also related to Social Security. I just saw a news report that during the debates on the COVID relief, Senator Mitt Romney offered different amendments, and he offered amendments for some sort of Social Security and Medicare Rescue Committee. That scares me. Do you?
It sounds scary. I'm not familiar with Senator Romney's amendments or proposed amendments.
Yeah, well, it was a particular amendment calling for creation of these rescue committees, but it got, there's about 70 senators who voted for it. So it definitely seems to be something we should watch for, because when they want to reform Social Security, that often means benefit cuts and privatization. And so
I shouldn't say the whole point. One of the points of the bill that President Biden suggested and that we're supporting is to do exactly the opposite. So yes, we'll be looking out for that.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to thank you, thank you, Carolyn and Rosalind, for representing our seniors.
Thank you so much. Moving
to preparing children and youth for success. So we have a number of different youth programs. So we're going to call on Deasia. We can unmute her. She's active with our after school and beacon programs here at Goddard Riverside.
Hello. So there continues to be mistrust and tension between police and communities. Young people of color are increasingly concerned with policing, and this was illustrated after George Floyd's and Breonna Taylor's murders, followed by the national and global protests of Black Lives Matter. Are there any bills pending in the House that would address needed police reform? If so, what is it in, and what will it address?
Yes, well, you just mentioned it. There's the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which came out of the Judiciary Committee, out of my committee, in the last Congress, and passed in the House last year. Hopefully it'll pass in the Senate this year too. The act would make it easier for the federal government to successfully prosecute police misconduct cases. It bans chokeholds. It ends racial and religious profiling. It encourages prosecutions independent from the local police. It eliminates qualified immunity. That's very important in civil rights lawsuits against law enforcement officers. I am pushing, well, I did push it to reintroduce it in the new Congress and get it signed into law. I should say I pushed to get it reintroduced, which it was, and we're hoping it'll be signed into law.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. So we'll be looking out for that. It is a big issue, as you know, here in our community, across the country. So also in our youth programs, one of our programs is Options, which assists young people and older folks who want to go on to college. And part of that, they've organized a broad coalition called Degrees, which works on issues around access to college and equity issues. So I want to call on Ishmael. We can unmute Ishmael, and you can have a couple of questions around college access and possibly student debt. Ishmael with us? Don't see Ishmael in the panel at the moment.
Well, I'll answer the question that you just posed. Yeah, student debt is a huge problem. and I'm sponsoring legislation to try to solve that problem along with Senator Warren. It's very complicated legislation, but it would, if passed, essentially eliminate the problem of student debt, because we don't believe, I don't believe, Senator Warren doesn't believe that kids who go to college should emerge with debt at all. Remember, it wasn't so long ago, back in the 1970s, that the City University was free. It had no tuition. Nobody undertook any debt. That was true from 1847 to 1976. The same is true in California. So if we could do it then, we can do it now, and we're going to.
Thank you. And if Lakeisha or anybody else out there listening, if they could contact Ishmael, if he is still available, we'll try to elevate him out of the audience and bring him into the panel. So, because I know he had a question. We also sent your office some information about the degrees program. And I know they'd love to schedule a meeting at some point in the future to cover a broad array of issues affecting college access and equity issues.
Sure.
Thank you. So I'm going to move on to our other cause area, our programs dealing with mental health issues. So that's promoting behavioral health and wellness. So we're going to unmute Laura, and she's involved with our TOP program. It was known as the Other Place because folks from our homeless outreach programs were told to go over to the other place, and eventually that name stuck and it became TOP. So Laura is going to ask a question that many of the members at TOP are concerned about.
Thank you, Congressman Nadler, and thank you everyone on the panel. My question was actually about crisis intervention teams. Goddard, I know, has long been a proponent of crisis intervention teams, which would be teams of trained mental health professionals to respond to 911 calls involving what they call EDP cases, which is basically just a person having some sort of mental health crisis or substance abuse crisis. The call now has been for these crisis intervention teams to only include mental health professionals. The program that we have tried in the past, over the 5 years of trying a program that involved police teaming with mental health professionals, 17 people at least that we know of were killed by police officers while experiencing mental health crises. So we no longer support that idea, and the push has been for crisis intervention teams to be corrected, so that this tragedy doesn't keep happening. And I saw that the House Democrats' COVID relief package does include support for what it calls bundled mobile crisis intervention services. And I was wondering if crisis intervention teams could fit into New York's version of this, and if you would support this concept.
Well, I do support the concept, and so do House Democrats. I mean, we know that the pandemic has contributed to an increasing mental and behavioral health crisis, and it has underscored the need to support community-based interventions for mental health and substance abuse. So the American Rescue Plan, the bill that we're supporting, addresses these aspects of the crisis by providing $4 billion for mental health and substance abuse programs, providing $100 million to expand access to behavioral health services through focused training for behavioral health paraprofessionals, such as peer support specialists through the Behavioral Health Workforce Education Program, and incentivizes state Medicaid to cover mobile crisis intervention services by enhancing federal Medicaid support for bundled community-based mobile crisis intervention services. But it changes the concept of mobile crisis intervention services, because right now, the problem is that when you call a crisis intervention, the police are often the first responders, and they don't have the proper training. And a call for mental health service often results in a tragedy. And what the bill combined with the George Floyd bill would do would be to change that so that police are not involved in the crisis response at all. And this should greatly reduce the odds of a bad outcome.
Great, thank you.
You should unmute, I think.
Thank you, Congressman Nadler. Sorry. Thank you for the answer around the mental health services. And I was just alerted to me, I described Degrees as a program. It's not a program here at Goddard. It's actually a large collective effort, a coalition that Goddard is helping anchor and working with. So it's not a program of Goddard Riverside, but again, it's a large coalition of organizations and individuals addressing college access issues.
Okay.
So want to move on to some of the housing questions. So the next would be, we're going to call Robert from the SRO Law Project, or the Law Project Tenant Committee. And let's unmute Robert and he can ask his question.
Good evening, Congressman Nadler and panel. My name is Robert Conkling and I live in West 14th Street, sir. And thank you for explaining the American Rescue Plan. I hadn't heard it put quite that way before. And I just want to take a look at a couple of these figures for a second, just so I can understand them a little better. I'd read before this call that according to the Congressional Budget Office, approximately 19 billion would be allocated to state and local governments to cover back rent, rental assistance, and utilities for the at-risk and low-income housing folks and unemployed members of the households. And I've also read that the legislation, if passed, would provide a total of 11 billion in rental assistance, homeless services, support housing, and counseling and mortgage support. That comes
No. Your information, I don't know where you got it, is wrong. The American Rescue Plan would provide $25 billion in additional emergency rental assistance, and it would provide $10 billion in homeowner assistance to help with mortgage, utility, and other housing payments. And it would provide another $5 billion for homelessness assistance grants to provide supportive services and emergency housing. And it would provide an extension on all eviction and foreclosure moratoriums through September 31st.
Oh, that's terrific. Thank you. Thank you for the clarity. And yes, so my information was incorrect, but thank you. What in your opinion is the chance of the American Rescue Plan being approved by both houses of Congress?
Well, it'll certainly be approved by the House, which has a Democratic majority. The Senate is much more difficult to say because the Senate makes everything subject. You have the filibuster, and we certainly couldn't overcome a filibuster. So you have to use reconciliation, and the requirements of reconciliation, which eliminates the necessity, the filibuster, but the requirements of reconciliation are very difficult, and whether we can do that or not, we'll see. We don't know yet.
Good, thank you. I think that's my question, except to say thank you for fighting to keep helicopters out of our airspace.
Well, we've been fighting on that one, unfortunately, for a long time.
Thank you, sir.
I think you should unmute again.
There's a copier running in the background, so I keep, that's why I'm muting myself, sorry. But in addition to the relief that's needed because of COVID and hundreds of thousands of households in New York that needed relief, we also have a huge number of tenants who are paying really high rent burdens. Is there any hope for expanding Section 8 or new rental subsidy programs beyond the rent relief that's necessary because of the crisis?
Well, Section 8, I don't think is going to be expanded. Oh, but we have, I'm sorry, Section 8 may be expanded. I thought you were asking a different question. The fact of the matter is that we have, you know, for NYCHA projects, we can go, we're putting up a situation where tenants can choose to go into Section 8 as opposed to what they have now. Some of the tenants are opposed to it because they fear privatization, but it isn't really privatization, but we have to explain that to them. But it would greatly alleviate the current problems.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking of, I guess, rental subsidy for people in private housing or people trying to get out of the shelter system into any sort of housing. We need new voucher programs and new rent subsidies for people to be able to find affordable housing in the city.
Yeah.
And across the country. This is certainly not just a New York City issue.
That's right.
So I guess that's a good segue into some more NYCHA issues and HUD issues. So we're going to unmute Polly and Cynthia, who are active with the Federal 8 and NYCHA leaders in here on the West Side. So they have some questions for you. So let's unmute Polly and Cynthia. So who's first, Cynthia or Polly? Polly? Okay. I think you're muted, Polly. Good
Thank
talk.
you. So first of all, Congressman Nadler, I want to say thank you and for all the work that you're doing on the Hill. And I was happy to hear that in your bill, $32 billion is being dedicated for capital repairs at NYCHA. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so as a member of the Federal 8 Coalition, we have been very active here on the Upper West Side and advocating, you know, to make sure that our buildings are safe, secure, you know, well-maintained. And so one of the things that we would like to know is, as our congressman, how can you help us to basically become designated as co-managers of the public housing complexes here on the Upper West Side? Because we're basically right now, you know, presiding over any issue that has to do with services, safety, security. You know, we've been working basically as unpaid volunteers for years, you know, to make sure that we get the services that are supposed to be provided to us. And so we like to know what you can do as our congressman to help us with our action plan, which is, again, to be designated and recognized by HUD as co-managers of our complexes. And the other issue is we would like to have the public housing campuses here on the Upper West Side designated as economic opportunity zones.
Well, Congresswoman Nydia Velasquez and I are sponsoring legislation to do exactly that. Whether it'll pass remains to be seen, but we are sponsoring legislation on exactly that topic.
What is the name of the legislation, or do I have to reach out to Nydia Velasquez?
Reach out to Nydia. I don't remember the name of the bill off the top of my head.
Okay. And so basically what we would like to know is we have something called the 964 regs, you know, which is in the Federal Register. So we like to know what we can do to strengthen that language because it does have a clause in there about resident councils becoming management entities. So would you be able to help us and assist us with that?
Well, that's what that bill does. It enables the residents to be the resident councils to become, in effect, the managers, and that's what we're sponsoring.
Right. What we have found is that NYCHA as an agency really doesn't honor that clause. And so we just feel that it needs to be more teeth put into that.
Well, it has to be strengthened.
Yeah.
Without question, it has to be strengthened. And that's why Nydia and Congresswoman Velasquez and I are sponsoring this bill to do exactly that.
So is it just called public housing bill, or you don't have any idea?
I don't remember off the top of my head what title we gave the bill. We have hundreds of bills, you know.
All right, thank you.
We'll follow up at your office to get that specific bill number so we can learn more what we can do to get more of the New York congressional delegation and others behind it. So I think Cynthia also had a question. Cynthia?
Yes, I have one question. Good evening, Congressman Nadler.
Good evening.
Currently, the federal aid, all the presidents do not meet with members of your office unless we are having an emergency. We'd like to know if that could possibly be changed where we could have monthly meetings.
Well, we can certainly, I'll stop you right there. Of course, we can certainly arrange that. You just requested.
Great, because, you know, we have gas issue going on over here. Another building, Wise Towers, is just currently going through packed, and they have a few bumps in the hill. And we'd like to be, you know, more hands-on involved with your office on making sure you're aware of all the issues that we have over here.
Well, sure. As I said, just call the office and the staff will arrange it.
Okay, terrific.
Thank you. Did Ishmael join us from the panel from representing the degrees?
Hi, Larry. I'm Ismail. I'm right here.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Hi. Hello, Congressman.
Hi.
Speaking on behalf of Degrees NYC, a collective within Goddard that focuses primarily on educational equity and advocacy. And I'm going to ask you two really quick questions that are both focused on policy. My very first question is in regards to a piece of legislation that you reintroduced earlier this month with Congressman Scott, and it's titled the Equity and Inclusion Enforcement Act. This piece of legislation in particular will restore the right of students and parents to hold schools accountable for discrimination. So in regards to that, I just wanted you to speak briefly to the significance of this bill and why you believed it was important to support this bill on behalf of your constituency.
Well, the reason is obvious. There is discrimination that goes on in schools, and we have to stop it. And that's why Bobby and I, as Congressman Scott, Bobby and I introduced this legislation, because it's intolerable in a modern society.
Thank you for that. And then just in terms of my second question, currently Degrees NYC is doing work on promoting advocacy around increasing the federal Pell Grant amount. And nationally, the average cost of attending public college as an in-state resident is $9,687. But the upcoming federal Pell Grant award that will be offered by FAFSA right now, its maximum amount is only $6,495. So Degrees NYC is just asking you directly, Congressman, do you support doubling the Pell Grant amount so that more students have access to college across the country?
Yes, I certainly support doubling the Pell Grant amount, but as you recall, I answered a little earlier that some of the legislation we're sponsoring would, if it passes, make universities free, or public universities completely free, as they were in New York until 1976. So this would alleviate that problem even more.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And I asked earlier, I don't know if you were on, if Congressman Nadler's office would be willing to meet with representatives of the Degrees collective, and he agreed. So we'll follow up as his office so you can, the collective can go over many of the issues around accessing college and equity issues. So now we're going to switch to some questions that have been coming in from the audience out there who are listening in through virtually. So one of the first questions had to do with the post office. It said, will the Democrats budget proper funding for the post office or eliminate their need to escrow 70 years of retirement funding?
Yes, there's been Democratic legislation pending for a while on that. The post office is the only agency of government which has to take care of funding for the next 70 years. No other government agency has that. It was put in by the Republicans under George Bush as a means of trying to privatize the post office. So yes, we are sponsoring legislation. Most of the Democrats, myself included, to eliminate that and put it back to the normal situation.
Thank you. Another question I see in the chat box here, how to deal with the media that is so heavily controlled by corporate interests that so strongly oppose everything you and the Democrats want to do for the public good?
Well, that's a very dangerous area, because it is very tempting from the left or the right, and we're obviously on the left, but it's very tempting to say that the media is unfair, which it may very well be. But to give government or any government agency the power to censor the media is to give government the power to squelch speech that you and I would agree with. So it's a very dangerous power, and it goes directly against the First Amendment, freedom of speech, and it's not something we can do. We just have to tolerate the unfairness of the media, because to do anything about it through government, I mean, people people individually and privately can support whatever media they want, and the more people who listen to a given station, the more ad revenues they'll get. So that will affect things, but government cannot start picking and choosing, because that's to give government a very dangerous power and against the First Amendment.
And I guess there's avenues for libel and slander. And
that goes without saying. There's libel and slander, and there's financial support, which you can register simply by which TV station or radio station or newspaper you buy or read, because that has direct financial impact on the establishments, and of course libel and slander. But government can't do anything, because that's giving government a power it should not have, and it's very dangerous power.
I guess, related in my mind is the immunity that the internet companies have, like Facebook and et cetera. Do you think there's a role there that they should also be liable for issues that they're publishing and getting out there?
Well, they should be liable like anybody else. Libel and slander laws, and they can be punished by in the same economic ways as anything else. But again, and that's, you're talking about Section 230, but to change Section 230 in a way that would give government the power to censor them would be dangerous under the First Amendment of freedom of speech, exactly the same as I mentioned a moment ago.
Thank you. No, and I respect that answer. Thank you very much. So another question we have, can you talk a little about how the hearing on reparations bill went this morning, HR 40? I don't know if you.
Well, the hearing went excellently. We had 8 witnesses. 6 of them testified very much in favor of the bill and the concept. 2 of them, the Republican witnesses, they're entitled to name some witnesses, testified exactly against the bill. But I'm very optimistic we will pass that bill. And Sheila Jackson Lee deserves a lot of credit for introducing it. She took it over from the late John Conyers, who was my predecessor as the Democratic leader on the Judiciary Committee, and the sponsor of the bill that made Martin Luther King Day a holiday. But I think the prospects of that legislation are very good.
Thank you. So next question I see here, regarding preparations for future pandemics, are you in support of the Global Health Security Act, HR 391, which would increase U.S. government preparedness for future pandemics?
Well, only a fool wouldn't support greater preparedness for future pandemics, obviously. So of course I'm in support of that bill. And there are a lot of things, we learned a lot about it, and we're doing fairly well at making scientific progress again to prevent such pandemics until Donald Trump, when he was president, destroyed all the scientific efforts of the government in that respect. He just eliminated all the funding. So of course we're going to put that back. And yes, then that's the point of the bill.
Thank you. So next question I see here, why wasn't disabled senior dependents included in the stimulus packet?
Why weren't disabled
senior dependents?
Well, they are included. as I explained before, they're included by changing the formulas, and they're no different from any other senior. We're going to use the CPIE instead of the CPI, as I explained, and they will be beneficiaries.
Oh, good. So they're not excluded. So there's the answer to that question. This is going back to the issue of student debt. And I know you were talking about trying to eliminate the tuition again at the public universities. But the question here I see is will eliminating student debt only be on public schools? And I think it's more encompassing than that.
Well, if the legislation that Senator Warren and I are supporting passes, and it's very questionable, but if it passes, it would eliminate student debt in all institutions.
Okay. And that's separate from the issue of course, trying to restore CUNY or SUNY to really affordable rates for so many low-income and working class people who could.
Well, it would include SUNY and CUNY. It would make them without any cost at all, as they once were.
Great. Okay, you read this one here. It says, nationally, the average cost of attending public colleges as an in-state resident is $9,687. Oh, this is the Pell Grant question. So do you support doubling the Pell Grant? And you answered that earlier. You said, yes, you do.
Yeah, but again, it's only the first step. Because the next step is trying to pass the legislation I'm supporting with Senator Warren that we've talked about.
This is an interesting question. Would you support getting rid of the filibuster? It's not in the House, it's in the Senate, but that's the question.
Absolutely. The filibuster is a remnant of slavery. It was set up initially to prevent Congress from being able to act against slavery that carried through even after the 14th Amendment. It was used to stop any federal action against lynching in the pre-war period. It's been used to prevent racial justice attempts all over the place. So yes, I would certainly oppose support getting rid of the filibuster. I think it's essential that we do so.
Thank you. And then somebody posted in a chat box the name of Representative Velasquez's bill that you're co-sponsoring. It's actually the Public Housing Emergency Response Act. And Jerry, the tenant leader here at Phelps House, is active with the National Alliance of HUD Tenants. And she posts that the National Alliance of HUD Tenants have signed on to support that particular bill.
Good.
That's
Good.
the name.
Good.
So the question is, again, going back to media and diversifying media ownership. Is there a way to break up some of these giant conglomerates?
Well, there's better antitrust enforcement. And I think that we need stronger antitrust laws. And I am sponsoring that along with Congressman Cicilline of Rhode Island. We just held hearings in my committee, in one of the subcommittees of my committee, the Judiciary Committee, and the Antitrust Subcommittee. And we produced a 334-page report. And we are going to be pushing legislation to strengthen the antitrust laws for that purpose.
Okay. Next question's got to do with Wi-Fi and broadband. Your background noise. But anyway, okay. New York state leaders claim 98% broadband coverage statewide, but this is not the case for all New Yorkers, including many low-income households. NYCHA residents, families in shelters, and those in rural areas. Does Congressman Nadler have any thoughts on giving priority to connect all students with the equipment and supports they need to fully participate in and have optimum online educational experiences?
Well, the American Relief Plan would, if it passes, cover not just some, but all. It would give 100% coverage. It would give the states funding to provide 100% coverage. and we hope it's going to pass, obviously.
Yeah, and it is so needed. I could tell you, once we got into this shutdown and everybody was having a virtual life, the digital divide with seniors and with low-income households and with residents in NYCHA, I was appalled. It was so difficult to foster communication.
It is appalling. It is absolutely appalling, which is the reason we're sponsoring, which is the reason we put it in the legislation.
Thank you. Thank you. It's so needed. It's so overdue. Okay. And I see thank yous from Polly and Cynthia in terms of getting the name of that particular bill that you're co-sponsoring.
That's the American, oh, okay.
The other bill,
yeah.
Okay, this is, let me see. Overdoses during the pandemic have reached over 82,000 since May 2020, according to the CDC. Would the Congressman's office be willing to meet with public information of Manhattan area Narcotics Anonymous to talk about facilitating publication of the NA helpline number and meeting information and distributing information more widely in New York City through 311 and government departmental kiosks, those things we have around.
Well, as I said earlier, we're always willing to meet. Just call the office and the staff will set up a meeting.
So the answer is yes. I see in the chat box, they give the contact information, please contact. So I'll pass that on to your staff so they can reach out to the NA group and set up that meeting. So those are some of the questions I have in the chat box. I guess I'd like to ask if any of the panelists had a follow-up question to anything that they had asked earlier, or a new question that came to mind. If I can see you in the gallery, so if you want to raise your hand, we could take a follow-up question if there are any. So we don't have follow-up questions from our panelists. I'm just looking to see some more get posted here in the chat box. And I guess I have a question, and it was about the infrastructure and what we need nationally in that regard. And I'm reading about the grid in Texas, how dilapidated that is, and what a disaster what they have with this deep freeze. What are the chances of dealing with infrastructure in a meaningful way?
I couldn't hear you.
Okay.
What are the chances of what?
Infrastructure. Are we going to actually have some sort of bill or initiative around infrastructure? Both on grid, highways, everything.
We're going to have a very large infrastructure bill, $375 billion, which is being sponsored by the chairman of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, Pete DeFazio, and I'm co-sponsoring it. And yeah, we're certainly going to try to pass that legislation.
It's so necessary. I don't know if you've heard, but just reading about how things have broken down in Texas with their own grid, it's phenomenal. Okay, I think some more questions were posted. It said at one point there was a campaign for universal child care. Do you see any hope of reviving that?
Well, if memory serves, universal child care is part of the American Relief Act. It's part of the bill. The bill we're pushing is 900 pages, so I can't be held every page off the top of my head, but I believe that that's part of the American Relief Act that the Biden administration and most of the Democrats are pushing.
Oh, that'd be good news. This other question is regarding debt. Is there a plan to address national debt? Can we expect additional taxation? Yeah, so I guess it's related to those issues and whether or not, I know President Biden had promised in the campaigns to revisit the issue of taxing high income earners.
Well, we're certainly going to increase the taxes on high income earners. The only question is what the measurements will be, but we're going to increase the taxes on high income earners. But you have to understand something else. increased spending, if you spend it on the right things, if you spend it on infrastructure, for example, if you spend it on various other things, it stimulates the economy. And it stimulates the economy so much that government revenues increase enough to cover the cost. So a lot of economists, a lot of liberal economists say you don't have to increase the taxation at all. But a good compromise is to increase the tax rates on high-income earners, even though it might not be necessary because of the self-fulfilling economic growth driven by spending more in the economy. It pays for itself. But just because some economists don't believe that, we're being very cautious, and we're going to increase tax rates on upper income individuals, though it may not be necessary, but it's okay because my heart bleeds for them.
And I guess some people are concerned about the debt, and I know I've heard you speak about it in the past, that, you know, being concerned about the debt when we need to stimulate the economy is the wrong thing. But
exactly right.
Folks were not that concerned about increasing the debt when it, you know, came to some of the tax cuts we saw with the last administration.
Well,
but
the Republicans are totally hypocrites on the subject. And it's not just the last administration. Going back to the Reagan administration, they increased taxes they decreased taxes greatly because they were worried about inflation in 1981, and it didn't work. They did it again in 1983. It didn't work. They did it again under Bush in 2001. It didn't work. They did it again under Bush in 2003. It didn't work, and they did it under Trump in 2017, and again it didn't work.
Yeah, and then they've always claimed those tax cuts would pay for themselves with stimulating the economy, and it's never panned out.
No, it's just the opposite.
Yeah. But that's part of starving the beast in terms of not.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. Starving the beast. That's what they try to do. But Paul Krugman calls the Republicans total hypocrites because he points out that whenever they're in power, they're worried about the deficit. Whenever the Democrats are in power, they're greatly worried about the deficit. And the moment the Republicans get into power, they forget about the deficit and they cut taxes.
Yes. Okay, so we can switch. I got a couple more questions have come into the chat box. Extreme gerrymandering has warped the political landscape at both the state and national levels. Is there anything Congress can do to rein that in?
Yes, gerrymandering should be reined in, and it should be, the district should be drawn by nonpartisan commissions, as some states have done. The legislation, HR 40, which is our Basic Voting Rights Act, which we passed in the House last year, also from my committee, and I was one of the main co-sponsors of it, would do exactly that. It didn't pass the Senate last time, but we're hoping this time with a Democratic majority, it will pass the Senate.
Good. And we're going to be, redesigning those seats soon, based on the last census. So that would be great if that can happen. And the state legislative lines are a mess here in New York State, and we do need them straightened out nationally. It's really crazy how it's done. Okay, let me go on to the next question here. All students, regardless of their race, ethnicity, or immigration status, deserve the opportunity for an affordable higher education. To support this goal, Congress should allow students from low-income backgrounds who are DACA/TPS recipients or those meeting similar requirements to be eligible for financial aid. Would Congressman Nadler be in support of this kind of legislation?
Yes.
Okay, there's the answer. Yes. Okay, next one. I'm Congressman Nadler's community liaison. I'd be happy to follow up on the meeting request posted tonight and any other community issues people have. So that's Hannah
Wienerman.
Wienerman at mail.house.gov. Or you can call the district office here in New York. I'll give that number out. She's posting it here. That's 212-367-7350. Again, that's 212-367-7350. So if you're a member of an organization or coalition that's would like to reach out to Congressman Nadler's office to arrange a meeting with Congressman Nadler or the appropriate staff person, you can use that number. And that's also the number we gave out earlier for folks who have constituent issues and need some direction. Next question. Can you talk about what kinds of support for local criminal justice reforms might come out of Congress to help local efforts?
Well, part of the George Floyd Act, which we passed, is to which we passed in the House. Again, came from my committee, and I co-sponsored it, and it passed the House, but it didn't pass the Senate last year. Would take care of those problems, and we're hopeful it can pass the Senate this year.
Thank you. Next question. Millions of Americans now believe in conspiracy theories with zero basis in fact. They're supported by an entire media environment that peddles lies. Is there a plan to deal with this problem?
Well, as I said before, government can't do anything about it because it runs into the First Amendment considerations. We may consider, I may consider, you may consider someone espousing conspiracy theories, whether if it's an individual, there's nothing you can do about it unless it gets into libel or slander. If it's a corporation, even if it's a corporation, I mean, you can sue it for libel and slander. You can bring economic pressure to bear by not buying the products that advertise on it. But government can't act in this because it runs into the First Amendment problems. Government can't pick and choose what's true and what's not true, what's a conspiracy theory and what's not a conspiracy theory, because that could be very dangerous in the wrong hands.
Yeah. Knowing that libel and slander is an important avenue to hold bad actors accountable. I mean, you can see it with the companies that produce these voting machines, and then just notifying the media companies that they're on notice. It did change some behavior in terms of them having certain disclaimers on different guests and the like.
Yes, and I expect to see libel and slander lawsuits against former President Trump. For that matter, I expect to see criminal prosecutions against former President Trump, but not because of his speech.
Right. And I guess that's still related back to the immunity that the internet companies have in revisiting that Section 230, because that could lend itself to change behavior and maybe cleaning up the internet a little bit too.
Yeah, but you have to be careful in amending Section 230 not to give government the power to censor.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's holding people accountable for lies and slander. If people want to believe the earth is flat, that's their business. But, when some of these conspiracies, result in violence, and people need to be accountable for their words.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let me get back to more questions here. I recently read that sections of the Biden-Harris proposed $1.9 trillion legislation incorporate potential significant changes to the tax law as it applies to child tax credit, earned income credit, etc. If the bill passes both houses of Congress, would the modifications become permanent or only affect the current tax year filing 2021 or both?
No, it would be permanent, or at least until Congress changes the law again, but it would certainly, it's intended to be permanent.
Great, thank you. Is anything that Congressman Nadler can say about the ethical question of requiring COVID vaccines for workers or for travel?
Well, yes, it's perfectly, what was the question? Is it ethical? Yeah, it is. It's a public health. It's a public health protection, which the government certainly has power to do and ought to do. You can't require vaccination per se, but you can make being vaccinated a condition of various things like getting on an airplane or various things that government regulates.
Thank you. I don't see additional questions in the chat box, so I do want to thank you for joining us today. Are there any closing comments you want to leave us with?
No, except to say that this is a very trying time, obviously, with the pandemic and with the economy, and we're hoping we can solve these problems by the legislation we're talking about. And I want to remind people, if you have any questions or problems, call my office. We gave the information how to do that, and thank you for holding this forum.
Okay. There was one more question just popped in. If we'll make this the last question, then we'll call it. And this was more of an international, I guess, question. We haven't covered foreign affairs at all. It says, please update us on the Yemen situation where hundreds of people have already died of starvation. I know President Biden has stopped sending in weapons to Saudi Arabia. Have the ports been opened up for food delivery at this time?
Well, the question states exactly what the facts are. President Biden has stopped the actions of the previous administration, and food is or should be getting delivered. And we hope, and of course, obviously, we have to talk to the combatants and to the various sides and try to damp down the situation. And we'll have to see what happens.
Okay. And I have to just mention this last question. Is there any action being taken to repair and support the crumbling non-for-profit infrastructure? Aside from the other infrastructure, a lot of nonprofit organizations have been working.
Not specifically, except that if the American Relief Plan passes, a lot of what the private nonprofits do now will be picked up by government and will be done there. And so the need will be much attenuated.
Well, thank you. Again, on behalf of Goddard Riverside and our program and our cause areas, and on behalf of our panelists, I just want to thank you for joining us. And if you do have follow-up questions of Congressman Nadler or constituent issues, or you would like to arrange a meeting, please reach out to his office, or you can reach out to us at Goddard. We'll get you in contact with his office. You can go to Goddard Riverside's website at www.goddard.org. That's GODDARD.org. You can learn about all of our various program or cause areas, the services we provide, and also get involved with our advocacy work. We think it's very important that people are civically engaged, that you're registered to vote. We have very important primary coming up if you're registered in a political party in June 22nd. The municipal elections here in New York City, the mayor's term limited, the controller's term limited, 2/3 of the city council are term limited. So it's a very important election. And we think it's very important that you make an informed decision and participate in the process. We're nonpartisan. We're not going to urge you to vote for a particular party or candidate. But we're going to host candidate forums in the coming months in May, closer to the actual primary date. So you can hear from some of the local candidates running for city council or borough president and help make an informed choice on who you want to represent you in the city council and beyond. So thank you, everybody out there in virtual land. And thank you again, Congressman Nadler, for joining us for this annual event. And
you're welcome.
We'll have you back again at our senior center when conditions allow it once again. Stay well.
You too.